Burnout Prevention Strategies for Working Mother. Interview with Dr. Jacqueline Kerr. Do you ever feel stressed and so overwhelmed with all the things that you have to do? And you worry that either you're going to break down or you won't be able to finish everything? And you feel like you're no longer enjoying the things that you used to do before. What is going on? And then you try to rest, and even resting doesn't solve the problem. Would you like to learn more about why burnout happens and how to prevent it in early stages? Then stay tuned. In this episode, our guest, Dr. Jacqueline Kerr, has some great pointers for you to prevent and overcome burnout, especially for working mothers. You're watching episode number 85 of Happy and Healthy Mind Show. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot. Dr. Jacqueline Kerr is in the top 1% of most cited scientists worldwide and is herself a burnout survivor. She's on a mission to prevent working mom burnout through her podcast, her TEDx talk, and behavior-based burnout solutions. And I'm your host, Dr. Rozina-Happy. I help organizations reduce burnout-related accidents. I'm a speaker, author, and an integrative psychiatrist. I believe that our mind is the software that runs the hardware of our brain and our body. And therefore, I share practical tips for your mental fitness so you can live your best life with hope, health, and happiness. If you find this content helpful, then join our mission of eradicating preventable suffering. And if you're joining us live, please add your questions in the comment section and we'll try to get to you as soon as we can. So let's learn from Dr. Jacqueline Kerr. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Tell us, how did this topic become important in your life? What kind of problems were you facing before you started applying some of the tools that we're going to talk about today?
Right. So I experienced quite severe burnout 4 years ago. I didn't actually recognize it as burnout at the time. It was only afterwards that I started to learn about burnout and then recognized that's what I was going through. So I was a professor at a university, bringing in millions of dollars for my research group. I led a large research group with students. I took on more leadership to have a position in the cancer center, to be a leader there. And in that process, I did actually lose some autonomy because I wasn't the head of that center. And so then I became answerable to other people, and that definitely provided more work strain. My son was being diagnosed on the autism spectrum. We also had a new puppy, and we sometimes laughed that it was the puppy that broke the camel's back. But I got to a point one New Year where my husband took my daughter to the pediatrician, and I had organized the appointment. I had taken her to every other doctor's appointments at that time, but that day I had a work appointment that I had to make. And it had been a difficult Christmas because I had been looking after the kids. My husband hadn't taken time off and we hadn't communicated about that, who was going to be with the kids over the holidays. And he came home from dropping my daughter at the pediatrician and was so proud of himself. And I couldn't bring myself to say thank you. And he was so disappointed in me. And so we had this enormous row, and it left me feeling that I just couldn't carry on. I really wanted to escape. And that night, I actually wrote a letter to my kids saying, I'm sorry that I'm not a good enough mom. I'm sorry that this is too much for me. You're wonderful, but it's not enough because I just can't cope anymore. And sorry, I can't ask for help. And as I wrote those words, and I sort of wrote them on my phone, and that's why I knew the date and the time and everything, and that's held so much meaning for me, I realized, why can't I ask for help? And so that was really the first step. And when I admitted to my husband how, problematic my feelings were, we agreed that I would go see a therapist, that I would take a leave of absence from work. You know, I wasn't sleeping, my back teeth were cracked, my cortisol levels were high. I was in such a state of fight or flight, and that was really the first step, was to realize that and start to reset my nervous system. But then when I went back to work, the stress hit me like a truck. I felt really cynical. I work in public health. I was doing such important work around age-friendly communities, really passionate about my job. And suddenly it felt meaningless. I didn't care anymore. And I really just couldn't see that there was a way to sustain this. So that's when I then left my job. And that's one of the things burnout quite often does leave in people, have people feeling that they need to leave or at least change their jobs. So, but I left this whole career as a professor in public health that I was so proud of and so passionate about.
Because so many people, women in leadership, professionals, like a high successful careers, they feel like there's no other way out other than
Mm-hmm.
quitting their jobs or their position, and losing all the things that they have worked for so many years. And so it kind of almost feels like a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases it may be actually a step towards next goal in life, but at that point in time when people are leaving, they actually feel like they have failed. And so
And
it's
that's what I felt.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
very hard for successful people, if you are just kind of doing your startup job for which you have not prepared so much for, and you have to change the job, it's not such a big blow. But then if you have spent years preparing for that and reaching that point, and suddenly then you have to leave, it kind of feels like it hits your self-esteem and self-image, because you've kind of developed your identity around that role. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I see that so much when people, and that's why I feel like instead of waiting for people to reach that point of burnout completely when there's no other solution they can find, how can we detect it early? How can we prevent it from going to that point, so you can keep your position, that you can keep the working on the jobs that you love and find that passion and purpose in life? And so if we can pick it early, if we can prevent it, then we can save so much personally and organizationally, because the organization loses when a really great person leaves that organization.
Right. No, I think that's so important. So when I did leave, I totally felt like a failure, and I felt I'd lost such an important identity to me, which was also a question: why was it so important to me? And at that point, my inner critic emerged and just hounded me 24/7, because I didn't have anyone else to blame at that stage. It was just me then starting to run my consultancy. So yeah, I think there's so many ways that we can step in much, much earlier. And actually, psychologist friends of mine always ask me to caution when I say to people, this was my burnout. It's very important to realize, don't get to the point of suicide ideation before you think you're burned out. There are so many steps ahead of that you can take. So one of them that I like to describe is Freudenberger and North have a 12 stages of burnout. And
All
stage
right.
one of that, so there's 12 stages. And stage one is the need to prove yourself. And so many of us can relate to that. If you're a perfectionist, a high achiever, a people pleaser, you have a great need to prove yourself. And that can come from your personality. It can come from family conditioning or social conditioning. It also can come from being part of a group who is marginalized, who is presumed incompetent, who is presumed uncommitted,
Mhm.
and mothers and women of color often fall into those groups. So they have to reprove themselves because, for example, when a man and woman are assessed equally for the performance that they've done in a job, the man is promoted because he's automatically assumed to have more potential. So women are
Mhm.
constantly having to reprove
Correct,
themselves
correct.
and work harder.
Yeah, I really could relate and understand this point where we have this inherent need to prove. And we'll go into detail in a little bit, but let me just ask you first. So you ended up at that point. It was building up, building up, building up. You reached that point of final burnout. You quit, and then you probably worked on learning all these tools that you're going to teach us. How did life change after you applied all those tools?
So I feel like, this has been 4 years and I would still consider myself in burnout recovery. I
Mm.
have to constantly manage those expectations. Obviously, during this time, COVID happened and all sorts of new expectations were upon me as a mother with two kids at home, helping with their schooling. So I think we're constantly having to adjust our expectations and manage them. So that's something that I'm always working on. And actually, some of the solutions that I have and some of the recommendations I have relate to getting a coach to actually help you have perspective. Because as mothers and mothers in society, we're so busy and we're doing so much. And often, for example, curating our perfect lives on Instagram. So we're not the best role models to each other. So you need someone like a coach that your workplace could subsidize so that you can get that perspective and get out of that mindset of being the ideal worker where you're 24/7 available and the ideal mother where you're 24/7 available. So, working mothers are expected to work like they have no children and mother like they have no job. So that's where we need perspective because that's the hole that we're in. So one of the tools that comes from coaching that has really helped me has been thought models and to really use those whenever I'm struggling because I do still get into situations where I'm feeling that need to prove myself, where I'm feeling the pressure and then the exhaustion and the dissatisfaction and disappointment with my performance. So I have to use those thought models to remind myself that that result is not what I want. I want to feel satisfied. I want to not be exhausted. So constantly working on reminding myself of that.
So what I'm hearing is that the challenges have not stopped, the demands have not stopped, but you're able to manage them better. You are not responding. The old tendencies do come back, but you're able to watch them and then modify them to in the best possible way. So
And
the
I
life
think,
has changed in
yeah,
that way that the stressors are there, you're able to manage them better, and so it doesn't reach to the point of total burnout.
right. So again, one of the models for burnout is that you reduce the stresses and you increase your resources. So increasing your resources is asking for help more often. Reducing your stresses is looking at what's on your plate.
So, Dr. Kerr, like you were talking about, the life has presented to you this opportunity where you came to realization that you needed to make some changes to avoid feeling this burnout. Once you applied all these tools, how did the life change? What changes do you notice in your life when you apply these tools?
Yeah, so I have much more awareness of my needs. I have much greater awareness of the emotions I'm experiencing. And particularly for me, one of the needs I recognized was through my love language, which was that I need positive affirmation. So here's an example. When I help my son, who's 14, with his mental health, I find it draining. So I actually, as a mother, was able to admit that to my husband. And then him now, when I come from, a time when I'm trying to help my son, he'll say to me, "Thank you for doing that. I realize that it's hard for you, and I really appreciate that you do that." So that's the life we have now. For me, not being able to thank him for anything, for him thanking me now for the things that I do that I admit are hard to do. So, one, it's being aware of the things that drain me and then saying, okay, even if I can't get help with them, I need recognition that I do those things despite how they make me feel. But most of the time, that is really recognizing, well, what are the things I'm doing that I don't enjoy, that don't add to our family life, and really reducing those demands and so much more often asking for help, but really being specific in what that help looks like. And that again came from one system that I used that was Fair Play, that showed me the 100 tasks that mothers and parents do to be a parent and to run the household. And once you have those described, you can then ask for help in a much more specific way. So that's really been so helpful for me.
Hmm.
Plus, to also find this new mission that I have in helping other working mums, because obviously I lost my passion for the work I was doing in public health previously. So for me to know that I have another passion and I'm so driven by it, that's really part of what helps me. So
Wonderful,
that's been
wonderful.
great.
So you regained your health, you
Hmm.
regained your relationship. I hope you're able to also thank your husband for doing things.
Exactly.
So it's
Absolutely.
both ways. And then you found the passion in work. So you're kind of
Hmm.
finding that purpose and joy again in whatever you are doing. So that's wonderful. My audience would love to hear some of the tools that have helped you. So it also helps them. So can you teach us some of the tools that have helped you?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that I really want to share is that, one, again, you're not alone in your burnout. I think that's so important for your audience to hear. People don't realize they're burned out, so they don't admit it. And sometimes they don't admit it because they're ashamed to. And it does feel like failure. So, again, that's the first thing. You're not alone. And the second thing is, this is not an individual problem. Some people see it as managing stress and your inability to manage stress, but burnout is caused by societal expectations of motherhood, societal expectations of the ideal worker, and then specific conditions in the workplace. For example, overwork, lack of autonomy, lack of reward, injustice, and values misalignment. So those things are part of what the organization and the safety in that organization. So I think it's so important for people to realize that when companies tell them self-care is the solution, that's not actually recognizing that the companies also need to change.
You're saying is it's not 100% personal reason, and it's not 100% organizational reason, but
Hmm.
it is the interaction of both. And then
Person, environment, fit. That's exactly it. Yeah.
so it's necessary to recognize that, not blame the organization
Hmm.
completely, because it's all organization. Once I stop working over here, all the problem would be solved. Because until you change how you address things, you would create the similar situation in the next job and the next job and the next job. So you want to work on your personal perspective, how you manage stress. What is burnout? Burnout is unmanaged stress leading to inability to feel passion and compassion for the work that you were doing before. And so that is personal responsibility of recognizing and taking steps to decrease your stressors and increase your resilience, like you said. But at the same time, as you're reducing the stressors, some of it is coming from organization and some of the things that you described. So the organizations have to work on their part, individuals have to work on their part, and that coming together can help prevent a lot of burnout and losses, like you described. That's
Yeah, and that's where those two things can also intersect, because as you start to develop healthier work practices, if you kind of keep that to yourself, then nobody else benefits from your experience. So the more that we can role model out loud the
Mhm.
individual lessons we have learned and the new work practices we do, especially as a leader, then we can also give other people permission to take on those work practices, to stop doing unpaid office housework. And those things can then help the whole organization change, because you change the culture by the behaviors you role model as an individual. And obviously then the organization does have to take on different workplace practices and policies. But I think it's so important for people to understand that there are so many different faces to burnout. We always imagine this overworked high achiever who basically can say, yes, a vacation will help you. But then there's these other people who, for example, like I said, have to reprove themselves. Their work has not been valued, or they've been marginalized in an organization. And a vacation and stress management isn't what they need. They need different institutional supports. Now, if an organization doesn't have those, isn't willing to change, at least people can understand what that would look like. So when they do change jobs, they know what they're looking for. Because again, if organizations try to tell us, yes, we're a healthy organization, yes, we support work life balance, and then those actually aren't the values that they work by, that's really deceptive. And that's often what happens to employees. They go into a place and it isn't what they thought. But how to look for those is also a way to help us in this situation if organizational change obviously is challenging and maybe slow to come.
Yes, yeah, and then there are things that are in our control, and then there are things that are not in our control.
Mm-hmm.
See, the more we work on things that are in our control, then the more power we get, the more influence we get. I had one patient recently who was like really feeling burnout at her job. And her thinking was, okay, I'm going to go and complain to my manager. Okay. And so we kind of work through in terms of, okay, when you do a complaint to somebody, okay, you are not doing the right with me, and you are doing this and you're doing that. What happens? There's a defense wall goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the manager, instead of looking at what can help this person solve the problem, they become defensive and then they start defending their action. So we worked through how to approach the situation. And so when she started saying, okay, when I do this and you're asking me to do that at the same time, that takes away my productivity. So can we do this system whereby if you want me to do these three things, you can help me prioritize, and then I can tell you I need 10 hours for this thing, 5 hours for this thing, 2 hours for this thing. And you can tell me, okay, but although you may need 10 hours, this 2 hour thing is more priority, and I will do that first. And so when we discuss these solution based discussion rather than complaint based discussion, and she went, the manager did not have the defense wall, and they were able to work out a solution that decreased this individual stress as well as help the organization and
Exactly.
prevented the burnout. So there's a way of thinking through about the problems, and instead of just focusing on complaining, if we kind of focus on solution based thinking and present that increases chances of getting the issues resolved or at least improved.
Mm-hmm. And that's why if we can actually start that from an analysis of what is it we're doing, how long do these tasks take, and which are the most impactful for the organization, then you're going to the organization and saying, I know what I'm doing. I've done this analysis. Can you help me think through this? And again, it even in that process of doing that analysis, writing down everything you do, how long it takes, and then actually recognizing which of the things do you enjoy versus which are you doing out of obligation. A mother could write that down and have so much she's doing out of obligation, and starting to track those things is a great baseline for us to start from. Tracking how often you're asked new things, when you say yes or no, all these tools are so important ways for us to set this baseline that then we can sort of work from and go, okay, where do I want to go? Because again, companies can really help with job crafting, and that's been related to improved job satisfaction. So that's really where you want to get to, and that's where managers want to get to. So I agree, you have to approach it in an informed and solutions oriented way.
Wonderful. Yeah, we are having so much fun that I didn't realize time is passing. So we need to wrap up. We can't learn all the tools from you right in this half an hour, but maybe we can learn more. If people want to learn more from all your tools, how would they find you?
The best place to reach me is on my website, drjacquelinekerr.com. And there are lots of free resources there. My podcast is there, my TEDx talk is there. And coming soon, I'll be doing some online courses to help managers really think through how they can help their whole organization by preventing burnout.
Wonderful, wonderful. And of course, all the contact information, and Dr. Kerr is going to share a list of all the resources and links that we are going to post in our resources page on happyandhealthymind.com. So go ahead and visit happyandhealthymind.com and press that button resources, and it would take you to all the resources shared by different guests on our podcast. And those of you in US who would like us to send you the links for reminders and resources via text. Please go ahead and send the word joyful, JOYFUL, to the number 38470, and we'd be happy to share those links. Let's wrap up today's session by thinking through where you are and where you want to go. If you are in a place where you are happy and satisfied in all the things that you are doing, then continue to work on improving your resilience. So in future, when the stressors become higher, your capacity to handle them allows you to prevent getting into the burnout or depressive phase. If you are feeling that you are at risk of burnout, your stress level is getting higher and higher, recognize it now. Start taking steps now so that you can get back to that happy, satisfied state, and prevent going from completely burning out. There are many resources. Dr. Kerr shared so many resources. I have so many resources. We are all working together. And so identify those resources and start taking steps to live your happy and healthy life. And of course, if you feel like at that you are burnout completely, know that you can reverse it, that you can come out of it. You see the example of Dr. Kerr, you have heard me sharing my example and a lot of other guests that I bring on the podcast, that no matter which state you are, you can come back. There are resources and help available. All you have to do is raise your hand and ask for help. Right. On that message, stay safe, happy, and healthy. Until next time, Dr. Rosina, and thank you, Dr. Kerr, for joining us today.